hopefully the topic that is first after lunch is something that will bring you back. I know we've all been eagerly awaiting the NARI Decadal Visioning Study funded by NSF. A lot of what we talked about in the last summit became one of the sources for this study, which we're going to be hearing more about in a minute. I just wanted to mention the Decadal Visioning Study, you're probably going to mention this too, is available on DesignSafe if you haven't already seen it, and we even have it linked in the program if you're interested in reviewing that. So I'd like to introduce Nora Schneider from Nexight Group, who conducted the study, and we are really excited to hear about it. I want to mention that after Nora's done with her presentation, we do have about 15 minutes for audience questions. So we have some students with some microphones. If there's any questions you'd like to ask Nora, hold on to those until after her talk. So, Nora.
Thank you, everybody. I am thrilled to be here. Some of you I've met in person, some of you I am looking forward to meeting. My colleague Jared is also here as well. We will be here through tomorrow, so please come find us. We're excited to chat about this Decadal Visioning Study. Today I'm just going to give kind of a brief overview of what we were asked to do at Nexight Group and kind of how we arrived to the study that hopefully you'll have a chance to read. I was talking to Jared earlier and we were reminiscing. This has been an 18-month project for us, and we were reminiscing on how I came to be part of the team, and I thought all of you would appreciate it. So I started working at Nexight Group in July of 2022, shortly before this project kicked off at NARI Summit, and I was coming into this excited because I'm a disaster and hazards historian and hadn't been working in that field, and I didn't really know if I was going to at Nexight, but I was hoping for it. And in October, Jared put out the call for someone to join his team to work on a decadal visioning study for the natural hazards engineering research infrastructure. And I looked at it and I was like, well, I'm not an engineer. That's way too smart for me. And so his initial ask, I didn't respond. And then a few weeks later, my main project got put on hold. So I walked up to him in the kitchen, had never interacted with him since I'd been hired, and said, hi, I want to work on your project. And I was brought on as a subject matter expert to explain it. And I was really open with him. He's an engineer. I was like, I can tell you about the hazards that have happened and what's going to happen, but I can't tell you what they're going to do to a building. And so we set out on this journey, and while Jared and I are here representing Nexight Group today, it was a huge team effort at our company. There were about 20 of our colleagues that helped with this, doing interviews. Some of you got to meet them, and you'll see the undertaking that we took now. So we were approached to put together a decadal visioning study to look at what natural hazards engineering research and natural hazards research as a whole was going to look like beyond 2025, right? What did your community envision for the future of your research? And there were two really key things that we were told needed to be part of this. So what are the engineering research needs to improve sustainability and resilience in civil infrastructure, especially with the climate crisis? And then what were the critically needed experimental and field research infrastructure components, cyber infrastructure, simulation and modeling, to really continue natural hazards engineering research beyond 2025? And so that is what we embarked on. I want to take the time to thank the 42 members of our study task group. Some of you are here today. I have met some of you. If I haven't met you in person yet, please come find me. It was a group that came out of NARI Summit 2022. Jared was there, and he asked all of you, who do you think should be part of this? Who do you think we should interview? And we had a list of probably 100 people. It was so exciting to see how many people wanted to be part of this. And when we were looking for who to be part of the task group, we had a few things that we were really focusing on. We wanted all the disciplines represented. So not only all the engineering disciplines, but we wanted social scientists, and we wanted computer scientists and data scientists. We wanted your community to be fully represented. We also wanted people from academia, people from industry. As you all know, your community is very prevalent in academia, so the task group did tilt. But we made sure to have people from industry who were practicing engineers and were able to give a little bit of a different insight into it. The other thing that was really important, especially for me, we're coming out of academia, was we wanted people at all different levels of their career. Right? We wanted people who had been in natural hazards research for a long time, who had helped develop it. We also wanted people who had been researching for a few years. They'd been teaching for a while. They had that experience. And then we also wanted members of your community who were just starting out, right? Because as we look towards the next 10, 20, 30 years, they're going to be the people that take what you all decide to do and move it forward. And we very successfully did that. And I, again, just want to thank every member of the task group that was involved in that. So, as Jennifer alluded to, this kind of kicked off at the last summit. And we took information about what you were all looking for in the future of research from the summit. We also looked at the second edition of the science plan. And then shortly before we released the third edition of the science plan. And this decadal visioning study is designed to supplement NERI's science plan. They're designed to go together as you think about the grand challenges in natural hazards research. And then Jared and I were fortunate enough to attend the Converge Leadership Corps meeting in 2023, where we were able to meet the facility PIs and the directors of the EERs that were mentioned earlier and get their insight into what they were looking for as part of an infrastructure in a facility. And so I also want to take the time to thank all of them for taking time to do interviews with us over the course of 4 months, I think. We did about 60, 65 interviews. It was the task group members, it was all the NERI facility PIs, and then we also wanted to talk to members of the natural hazards research community that maybe weren't associated with NERI. So they were looking at hazards that aren't part of NERI's scope. They may not be familiar with NERI. They were after the interviews. And so we wanted to make sure that we were getting that full representation of the entire research community. So our team did 1 hour Zoom interviews with all of these lovely volunteers who we couldn't have done without. And then we also used an online platform to gather additional information on areas that people had thought about after their interviews, potential topics. When we were really finalizing the data, going to them and saying, does this language make sense? Did we explain it wrong? We used all of the information from the meetings, the interviews, and that asynchronous online platform, took all of that data and synthesized it so that it was all completely anonymous. We had no idea who said what, and then went through and analyzed it to figure out what was standing out, right? And very clearly, and I'll talk about our results, it's all topics that have already been discussed this morning. So very quickly rising to the top, were very clear intentions from your community for what research looked like after 2025. And so the way we determined, we would have liked to included everybody's input, right? Everybody does. If something was mentioned once or twice, it's likely not in the study. If it was frequently repeated, then it rose to the top. And the reason we did that is we wanted to make sure that everybody's input was considered and representative of the community, but we also wanted to make sure it was within the scope of what NSF and NERI and your community could do. There are a lot of great ideas that came out of this interview. With endless time and resources, it would be great. So we really focused in on what the next 10 years could look like for your community. And these are the results. So the study is divided into two sections. The first one focuses on kind of facilities, equipment, and tools, right? What does the future of experimental facilities and cyber infrastructure needs look like? And then the second section is focusing more on research focus areas, collaboration opportunities, either using those facilities and cyber infrastructure or not using them. And this is a very high level representation of it. Each of these topics has multiple recommendations underneath it. It was interesting to hear what hazards were kind of repeated over and over again, and the experimental facilities, as well as the kind of focus areas, elaborate on that. Like looking down the line, what hazards and their impacts on infrastructure does your community believe need to be studied? Obviously, climate change runs throughout this whole study. But the other thing that came out of this, and you see it in the equipment and tools section, but also the focus area section, is the importance of collaboration and coordination. So we were very excited to see the theme of this summit. It aligns so much with what your community said they wanted and needed the next 10 years of research to look like. And collaboration and coordination just kept coming up over and over again. And it was, and we heard it this morning, collaboration amongst all of you, within your disciplines, outside of your disciplines, but also external stakeholders in private industry, federal agencies, government at the federal, state, local, regional, tribal, territorial level, anyone who is impacted by a hazard, which at this point is everybody. That collaboration and coordination needs to tie into them. And community engagement was one of the biggest things, right? So we heard a little bit about that this morning. A lot of the recommendations that are in this study talk about taking your research and making an impact with it. And so we were very excited to see that. But I think the other thing to think about, there's a section on education, training, and workforce development. You all can go out, you can do your research, you can be in the field, you can write papers, but you are nothing without continuous learning, as well as helping the next generation of researchers coming up. And so that section looks not only at all of you who are currently practicing and teaching, but also those high school students and undergrads, and maybe even, the elementary school students who are like, I want to do that. How do I do it? Right? And it was really important for us to kind of represent both the current community as well as the future community. That is all I've got. I'm excited to hear from all of you. Please come talk to us. We'll be around. Also, feel free to email us. We want to hear from you with your input and feedback on the study. Jennifer is running a panel session tomorrow on just that, with breakout sessions for you to come and talk about some of the topics that came out in our study. Jared and I will be there as well. So if you're able to make that, I know there are some really awesome panels at the same time. And I kind of told Jennifer I wanted to go to one of those instead, but she said I couldn't. So we really are so excited to be here and to talk to all of you, and we're really looking forward to seeing what natural hazards research looks like beyond 2025.
Thank you for that. Are there any questions? We do have time for questions, and we have microphones, so just raise your hand if you have one. And don't be shy. Or you could save it for the session tomorrow, too. That's fine. Sorry. Anyways.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, you had 2 sections that had no bullets under them.
They have lots of recommendations.
Okay.
So when we were going through how to organize it, some of the sections were very large, like facilities, equipment, and tools. It is everything you could possibly imagine wanting to do your research, and we had to break that down. Otherwise, it would have been a whole lot of paragraphs. It doesn't negate the importance of those headings that don't have bullets under them. They're just not broken down into smaller pieces as much.
We have a question over here.
I'll repeat the question.
We're recording.
Thank you for this great presentation. You mentioned you interviewed folks from senior level to early career, and I was wondering if you heard any differences in the recommendations, kind of stratified by career stage.
There were some differences. What was also exciting is that there were also not differences, right? So when it's looking at focus areas and collaboration opportunities, they were all very similar. You'll see that in the facilities, equipment, and tools section, there's a section on ensuring equal accessibility to facilities. A lot of that was from the early career, that we're still trying to get projects going and maybe not really sure how to do it because they're the ones that are going to be able to say, like, I need this to do a proposal. But otherwise, there was a lot of just across the board, regardless of career level, really like solid feelings about what needed to be done. I think it was more a difference in the logistics of it, like what that looks like.
Other questions? I'll ask a question.
Thanks for the presentation. I was curious of the different people you interviewed, if there were interests expressed regarding some of the Arctic-related issues of permafrost, glacial, cryosphere, et cetera, and if that's something that wasn't of sufficient interest, so it wasn't included in the list in the document, or if that's just for another place or another
We
time.
did hear that.
Okay.
I was actually really fascinated by it. But it was a very small pool. If we'd included even the original draft, some task group members are sitting here being like, that is not the draft I reviewed. The original draft was like 90 pages. So we really focused on like scope, and I don't want to use the priority word because I don't think anything is a priority above anything else. But we really looked at kind of consensus of input. And so Arctic was mentioned, extreme cold was mentioned, but there was other input that more people were talking about across multiple disciplines and different focus areas that we wanted to make sure we included. So that's not to negate that input. We just really wanted to make sure that we were looking at all aspects of the research community, all the disciplines, and the ways to approach things.
Any last questions? This is a fantastic opportunity. Okay. Oh, got one here.
Thank you so much. I was wondering if you could chat a little bit more about the third bullet under the use-inspired and translational research, about what you see as the emerging technologies, or what was found within the report to be within that category of emerging tech.
Right. So there are a lot of recommendations that deal with convergence research and emerging technology, and this is actually a theme that goes through the whole study. Right. It's that underlying theme of, do we have the technology to do these things? One of the big themes was this idea of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and we saw great examples of that this morning, and we started seeing that tying in with convergence research. So bringing in not only engineers, but social scientists, computer scientists, data scientists, and then also really including people on the ground. So emergency managers, urban planners, and we made sure that there were members of the task group that had backgrounds in urban planning and emergency management so that we had that perspective. And the emerging technologies, for some of the bullet points, you'll see there's like a specific idea, right? For other recommendations, it's a recommendation. People are saying, we need this. There may not be a way to implement it in the study, and that's just because people would say, I feel very strongly that we need this. I don't know exactly what that looks like. And so with the emerging technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning was talked about a lot in different ways. The other thing that came up, and I can't remember if it's in that section or one of the other sections, was how to show people that are new, the undergrads, right? They're starting the other opportunities that there are in the community. So not just academia, but industry and government. And you saw the emerging technologies discussion really come out there, right? So that if you have a student who is like me and is just really into hazards, and their parents may not know what to do about it because it's a sad topic. But they don't want to go into engineering, right? Engineering may be a little bit of a push, but they're also really into data. So they're looking at, if I become a data scientist, what technologies are available for me to study hazards? And so there's a lot of that discussion as well. But there are also areas for all of you to provide your input where someone says, we need this, and we don't have a way to do it. And that is now up to all of you to talk about what that future looks like.
Good afternoon. Thanks for your summary. One of the things in today's society that seems to drive a lot of energy and even directions we go is user experience.
Yes.
We inherited that from the cyber side of things. And I actually recently was involved in a workshop that had to do with infrastructure, not hazards related. And so included in that workshop, we had a user experience specialist. And I found it fascinating to see how their perspective on the user experience actually substantially drove a lot of what then others began around the table who were maybe more engineers or researchers or whatever, but they began to think about how to frame the problem. And so that long introduction, was there individuals who you either on your study or who you talked to that really brought the concept of user experience into what you've done?
Yes. So the user experience discussion comes up in the cyber infrastructure and data repositories and how to use data and how to reuse data and how to make researchers know what data sets are available. All right, and so it was very interesting to talk, it goes back to the career levels, right? Talk to people who had gone through varying iterations of what a cyber infrastructure looked like, and those who cyber infrastructure was just always naturally part of their research and their schooling, and what those different groups needed for a user experience in data repositories, data sets, communication, and at the facilities. So that it doesn't there's not a section that explicitly it says user experience, but it's underlying in especially in the discussions about data collection and data management.
There's a lot of really exciting new things in this report, but I wanted to just draw on your background as a historian to ask, on your reflections on, have you seen any historical themes or trends reemerge in these interviews?
That's a really good question that I haven't thought about. So I look at natural and man-made disasters and hazards. My undergrad thesis was on a hurricane. My doctoral dissertation was on the Holocaust. So I kind of I go to the extremes. One of the things that came up in a lot of the conversations was how a massive event will get the attention of the mainstream media, and there'll be this huge push to research it. And then another event like that may not happen. We talked about this with tsunamis, right, and earthquakes. They're happening around the world. They're not recently so much happening in the US where they're drawing mainstream attention, unless you were in New Jersey a few weeks ago. And this idea of what do people study and why, right? And what does that mean? So I looked at the impact of hazards I studied the hazards and their impacts on culture and society. I didn't think I was thinking about infrastructure because I wasn't specifically talking about buildings and things like that. But when I looked back and thought about it, I mentioned in my undergrad thesis the impact on New England's culture when all of the church steeples were destroyed in the hurricane, right? And then I realized, I am looking at infrastructure. And so in the conversations, it was really interesting to see how that idea of like what draws people's attention for research and also how they define things. I think, and this is coming from someone who had to look up a lot of lexicon, I think that the vocabulary is changing right now in your community. And it's really interesting to see that shift, right? I've had a lot of conversations with people that were like, we don't like to use the word disaster anymore, it's a hazard. And I actually changed my title. I was a disaster historian, now I'm a disaster and hazard historian because of the conversations I had with all of you. So I think we're starting to see a shift back to the importance of what you all do for a larger perspective of like culture, society, and infrastructure, but also questioning how that vocabulary changes along with it.
All right, thank you so much.
Please come find us. Thank you.